We've got a few attendees. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, From Business Continuity to Business as Usual, and where we'll be talking through some tips, techniques and things to consider around having an exit plan in place. I'm Anthony McMahon and I'll be hosting today alongside Laura and Alistair, who you should be able to see up in the top left corner of the screen there. Thank you to Alistair and Laura both for taking the time to take part in this, and also for providing some valuable input as well. I'm just going to do a very quick introduction of the three of us. So I'm Anthony McMahon. My background, I have a strong background in technology. I've worked as an enterprise architect and within services management, where I spent a large part of my career actually managing major IT incidents, which often included the invocation of disaster recovery, which is not quite the same as business continuity, but it does involve an exit plan as well. So I've had a bit of experience with technology coming out of things where it shouldn't be. I'm now an independent technology consultant, providing guidance to businesses on how to tie tech plans into strategic goals in order to achieve the best possible outcomes. Joined with me today is Laura Topless. Laura was previously the Business Continuity Coordinator for the New Zealand Ambulance Service and has developed a product from her experiences called BCP Builder, which is an online business continuity plan template. It helps small and medium-sized businesses quickly design and build their own unique, compliant business continuity plan. And when I say compliant, it's compliant to ISO standards, to be better prepared when disruption strikes, to respond rapidly and recover confidently. So thank you, Laura. Welcome. And also on board we have Alistair Miller. Alistair actually gave me a very large profile which contains so much alphabet soup in the abbreviations that you've got to trust he knows what he's doing. I'm not going to read them all through because we'll be here for most of the hour, but he's a certified ethical hacker and has qualifications in CISSP, ISSAP and CCSP. He's now the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer for Network Services Partners? Providers, or NSP, as they're better known, where he offers a deep understanding of IT governance, risk management, security strategy, and architecture to enable businesses to take technology from a cost to a driver. So the three of us are here today. Just a little bit of housekeeping for this. As it's a webinar, we've got broadcast only, so you'll hear from Laura, myself, and Alistair. We do have the opportunity to ask questions, and what I'll ask of you is if you could put them into the Q&A section rather than the chat section. And the reason for that is that we'll be able to keep track of them in a better way. We'll identify which ones we've answered. We're going to go through a few slides first up, and then we'll switch to more of an open panel conversation where we'll facilitate those questions. I've got a few to put to Laura and I've got a few to put to Alistair. They may have some to put to me as well. But anything that you do put in that Q&A section, we will endeavour to get to. This session has also been recorded and we'll make it available to everyone who has participated and everyone who can't make it, because I know there's some people who are interested around the world, not just in New Zealand. But the main focus and the reason for running it today and not later in the week, we have the pending announcement later this afternoon of what's going to happen with our lockdown levels for New Zealand. So the intent was to try and provide some guidance ahead of that for those businesses who may be able to start to open up some of their services, and also provide guidance for the businesses as we move into less restrictive solutions such as level 2 and hopefully level 1 as soon as we can. So we'll kick off. Today, what we're going to cover very briefly before we get to the open panel, just some high level things to consider around exiting a business continuity plan. I'm then going to have Laura will talk us through business impact and risk threat analysis and how to apply those at this stage of your life cycle as well. Alistair's going to touch on some of the security considerations you need to make. I'll finish up by tying it back to what you need to think about for your technology plan, and then we'll go with an open panel and concluding with open questions as well. So as I say, if you've got any questions, fire them into the Q&A session, and we will do our best to answer them as much as we can in the moment. So very briefly, coming out of a disaster recovery scenario or a business continuity scenario, which way you look at it, there's a few things you should be considering early and planning the sooner the better. They're not complete detail, but what you need to be doing with these is making sure that not only the business decision makers, but also the people within the business know them. And the reason behind them is, particularly in this case, just because the government says we can go from level 4 to level 3 and businesses can open, that doesn't necessarily mean they're making the decision on behalf of the business. It's still up to the business owner and it's still up to the people within the business to make that decision and determine what's best for them. So some of the things to consider is who in your business is making the decision. Do they know they're making that decision? And does everyone else know they're making this decision? Sorry, I just see one question come through, Mark. Yes, the slides will be made available as well, so we'll be able to pass them through to you. So tick that one off now. So who's making the decision? And what's the decision point based on as well? What are the decision points that will drive it? And Laura will talk through some of this with the business impact assessment and the risk analysis, and also the security elements. What are some of the things you need to be considering within your business to actually open it up? You know, if you're in a fresh fruit and produce, can you open tomorrow, or do you need to get in and clean the entire store that you work from because it's had rotten fruit for 2 or 3 weeks because you haven't been able to get in there and deal with it? The second part of this is how you're going to communicate it. How do you communicate it to your customers? How do you communicate it to your staff? You want to have a point where staff aren't operating on rumour and innuendo. They know that when they've heard from their manager that they can come to the office tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, that that's a factual statement and they're able to follow it. You don't want that confusion amongst your organisation that people don't know whether they can come or can come into the office or have to stay home. What do you need to undo? So I know for some companies, not everyone, the cloud has certainly, or working in the cloud has enabled a lot more remote working, but for some companies, they've probably punched some very big holes in their security infrastructure to be able to work from home. So what do you need to start undoing? And Alistair's going to cover some of that off as well. And then the final point as well is, what do you want to keep doing once you return to normal? There's probably a flip side to this as well, is what do you want to stop doing once you return to normal? I'm going to pass to Laura now for the next segment, which is business impact analysis and risk and threat assessment.
Thanks, Anthony. Great to be here today. So the first thing I wanted to discuss was that when you're ready to return to your new normal, it's important that you hold a debrief and take stock of what has happened. So have a think about what went well, what didn't go so well, and any lessons learned that you want to carry forward. So if you're working for a bigger organisation, there might be something that one of your departments or one of your teams implemented that was really genius, and you could roll that out across the whole organisation. But if you don't hold these debriefs, then the lessons learned can be just lost, and they're not lessons learned then, are they? So during this meeting, you should also review your business impact analysis. So BIA lists your products and services in order of priority. And with a big shift in the way your business is operating, your most important products and services may have changed. So when you're looking at, in New Zealand, we're at level 4 at the moment. So some of your products and services might not be operational or happening at all. So the order of priority, you can see on the screen here, you've got critical, essential, necessary, and desirable. They may have changed. So some of your services that are desirable to have, it's possible that you might actually want to cut those altogether if they're not making enough money, if they're not worthwhile. In terms of your risk and threat assessment, that should, at the moment, is probably focused on how COVID-19 has impacted your business. And coming out of the pandemic, it's important to broaden your thinking and discuss any other risks that could impact your service delivery. So you should be looking at an all hazards approach, and just looking at all your different products and services and thinking about the different kinds of things that could impact those. Now, Alistair has a few points to make on security and risk and threat assessments.
Yeah, it's the important thing to consider here is, now that the environment has changed, to who your main threat sources and threat actors can be. Usually, from a security point of view, you're thinking of the hackers, the activists. But in this case, you're now looking at as a threat source as COVID itself. So obviously it has no sort of mental impact. It's not planning to do stuff, but it's going to impact various services and features that your organization would offer. Now, a non-thinking threat source is kind of environmental, so the same as a hurricane, a tsunami, a fire. So your risk assessment, you've got to add in a pandemic to your risk assessment. Most people are unlikely to consider that. Earthquakes in New Zealand is definitely something that most people will have in a risk assessment. They may well have understood that a natural impact is different to an individual or a sort of a thinking source. But COVID is, especially for organisations that are international, is going to be reflected differently in each country. Australia and New Zealand have taken different approaches to how they are going to run their businesses. Australia is much more open than New Zealand, even though we seem to be approaching the outcomes seem to be quite similar at the moment. So, yeah, there's a difference there of exactly how each international market may affect or be affected by COVID-19. So, if you are international, you're going to have to look at each market and sum up how they're working on COVID-19 themselves and how they are. You're going to have to find out from their local health ministry what they're planning to do with it and how that will affect you. So suddenly your risk assessment spawns an international aspect that can suddenly, well, can run out of control if you really are a truly international company. I think that is the main difference that security is going to have for this one, is you've suddenly got an international aspect that's going to be constantly changing. So you're going to have to be constantly revisiting it. It's never going to be static. And yeah, so it's constantly moving, basically. You can't just keep one view and then go, that's what we're working from. You're going to be constantly moving. Even I imagine New Zealand itself may go down to level 3 and then go back up to level 4 if something unfortunate happens. Or we may go to level 2 and then 3, so it's never going to be static. So you're going to have to keep moving. So yeah, that was my main point on this one, is it's a very dynamic risk assessment that is going to be, if you are international, constantly changing. It may even change within New Zealand, with certain cities being locked down more than other ones. So the dynamic aspect is going to be important. So yeah, that was me on this point. All right, it's me on the next points as well.
Straight on to you on the next one as well, Alistair.
Yep. So the main security aspects that are going to be part of a BCP plan are the users and the data. So your data has probably stayed where it was during the BCP. So it's either in the cloud or on a server in your office, and you've given people access to it somehow. Now your users have moved all around the place. Some people for essential services may still be working in a set location, but all your users are all over the place. So how are you protecting those, both from the data and the users? What changes have you made to them? How easy is it to move them back? Now for cloud services, nothing should have changed. Maybe you decided that something like MFA is something that you put on. Are you going to take it off? Hopefully not, because it's a great feature, adds a lot of security. You may get some pushback from users that it's unnecessary. I mean, certain products allow you to whitelist IP addresses, so if they come from them, they don't have to use it. But any security additions that you made to protect your users as they got around the place, this is kind of an opportunity to make them stick, because they'll have seen the value and you hopefully have been able to communicate the value of them, and they're going to go, oh, okay, let's stick with that. Because often it takes a push to get people to do something that is not frictionless. Some security is frictionless, but this is an opportunity to live with that. Now for the data, hopefully for a cloud services, it's all staying in the cloud or it's synchronized to it. But a lot of users will create data that is sitting on their devices and that will not have gone back to the cloud, or they may be working slightly differently, using email that is personal to talk to people now they're out of the office, going into bad habits that can happen where, you know, people should be working following a specific process but now aren't. So data can be fragmented, and getting it back to where it all should be, making sure it's all synced up and there's not a huge number of versions, is just hard work. This is where you, as Anthony was saying earlier, you need to communicate to people, ensure that they know when and where things should be. So is it all backed up? Is it in the right place? Is everyone confident that the version is correct? And then hopefully you've been doing this over the period, but have you been actually accessing the logs to see who's been using your data? Is it all who should have been, or people who should have been haven't been? And that is often an indication that they're running on offline copies of things. And then have you tested going into BCP your security measures, that you're confident that your organization is not taking a huge risk by rolling into BCP? And then have you tested rolling out of them with the security? I'm not suggesting penetration testing or anything that extreme. We haven't had the time or the costs, but there's a question. Hopefully you shouldn't have to destroy any data that they've taken across. It's just making sure that it's secure and that it's all the same version. The problem is when things get offline, this is more for servers that you run in Office, and that could be a challenge. A lot of people will have shredders for their personal information, their PI, for bank statements and things like that. If you could encourage them to use that. Otherwise, it can end up in the recycling. And dumpster diving usually happens at corporate large-scale dumpsters. I can't imagine people are going to dumpster dive at individuals' levels, not unless there's someone well-known who the local media would be interested in getting something for them. So you can encourage that as just destroying data and, you know, shredding normal documentation that they get. But I wouldn't make a special note of that. But it may be worth saying as part of Anthony's communication plan that destroying things they printed out. Certainly PII should be considered, and with the law changes coming in November, it's something to start educating all employees on what PII they're accessing and whether they should be and how they're actually controlling it. But hopefully they're not printing out a lot of PII at home. If they are, and that's something they can do, I think that's a bigger issue that the organisation has. Because printing out PII in the office is quite risky. Printing out PII at home would be an issue that the Privacy Commissioner would probably want to know about.
And some of that also ties into your existing policies and processes, if you've got them, as to what they say should be done with PII or physical copies of data, really, shouldn't it, Alistair?
It should be, and yeah, I would definitely be looking to leaving all PII as electronic, and with the new law changes saying, is it accurate and is it up to date? It should definitely be part of that, and people printing out stuff at home is probably a no-no.
Yeah. I'll take the opportunity, we'll move on to the next slide, then we'll have that chance for that open forum as well, where there's some good questions there. Mark, I see a couple of yours that I do want to come back to as well. So some of the things that Alistair and Laura touched on there tie back into your overall technology plan as well. So there may be some organisations, whether they be small, medium, large, it doesn't matter, locally, globally, that have actually adopted ways of working that weren't the norm before. Now I'm talking of remote working, obviously, using tools like Zoom, and using some of the other technology solutions out there. So one of the things that needs to be taken into account, not necessarily as part of going back to business as usual. I'm hesitant to say normal because there is no normal. But one of the things that does need to be taken into account is, are those ways of working going to be adopted long-term for your organization? And if so, what considerations do you need to make? Not just tying them into your technology plan. So for something like Zoom, if a business chooses to use that moving forward, some of the things they'll need to think about are licensing, admin roles, admin controls, putting in place appropriate protocols, processes, and policies around the use of Zoom, who can use it, when they can use it, and how to use it. To reduce the security risk, but also the actual underlying policies of an organization. So not just a business continuity policy, but a health and safety policy. If you're now deciding we've proven we can work from home and now we want to offer roles to work from home, or we want to offer people the ability to work from home more regularly, what does that mean for your health and safety obligations? What does that mean for your technology security obligations? And what does that mean for your privacy obligations as well? Alistair's referenced the changes to the New Zealand Privacy Act. I know that California has got their changes recently announced, and GDPR out of the EU, obviously. Sorry, let's not confuse the UK and the EU. So what are some of the things you're going to need to consider from a regulatory perspective and from an obligation perspective as well. Something that I've now started to see is companies that are actually offering this role will be working from home. So they've gone, well, look, we can work from home now, so we'll hire people to work from home. Kind of changes the playing field a little bit in what you're offering that role as well. So again, the things you need to think about are what are you now expecting people to do from home, and how do you make sure they have the technology set up to keep safe and secure. You know, it's not good enough just to run on a commercial grade, a consumer grade router anymore. You may need to provide them something a little bit more high spec. Second to that is, what do you want to stop doing? You know, what are some of the silly processes that we've seen? And I use the tweet out of the New York governor as a prime example. You know, there was no rational reason as to why people had to go to a specific office to get a marriage license, to get wed, and to perform the right ceremonies. It was a legal obligation on them. We can change those laws. We can change them to make sense. We can do it within a business as well. What are some of the things we want to stop doing today because we've found that they're either not efficient, not effective, or they just make no sense for our business either? So it's working through with the decision makers, and it's working through with your IT partner or your security partner if you've got one, or your IT team or security team around what you need to be doing. And I can't stress enough, communicate, because not only do you need to be communicating with the people who will help you, you need to be communicating with your customers and your staff as to what's actually part of their obligations now. I'm going to stop talking on that slide because I could probably talk all day if I wanted to, but you don't want to listen to that. And we're going to move to the open discussion. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can just get a better view of all of us and you're not taken over by that. We're going to start with some of the questions that have come through in the thread. And then I've also got a few that I want to put to Laura and Alistair directly. And if you've got questions you want to ask of me or of each other, that's fine as well. So the first one, and this comes all the way from Mark, and I think I saw in the comments that you're in Wisconsin there, Mark. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. But it's a really good one. I don't know if we have the honest answer for you at the moment, but you've asked the question about the considerations of staff that become or are found to be unwell once they've come back to work. I'm going to let Alistair or Laura have a chance to answer this as well if you guys want to jump in. I do have a view, but if you've got something you want to add first, then that'd be great.
I think a big part of it is about the culture of the organisation. So I think it's going to be really important that people feel safe to call in sick. They don't feel, you know, once it's gone back to your new normal and we're back in the office, that they're unable to call in sick, because you don't want that, especially if it's COVID, you know, if we're talking about COVID or something else, you don't want it spreading through the whole office. So, you know, they need to feel safe to be able to call in sick and work from home if they're not that unwell, or just actually take a legitimate sick day if that's necessary. But if, you know, if they have been in the office and then we're talking about COVID, then you've got your contact tracing requirements, and then any of their close contacts will need to go into self-isolation so that it doesn't rampage through your entire office.
Yeah, you want to avoid the sort of the hero who comes into the office suffering from diseases and going up showing what a martyr they are by coming in, and they're offering nothing to the business. They're usually, if they're not spreading their germs around the office, they're occupying everyone's time by telling them how ill they are and how much of a hero they are for coming in. You want to have the culture that encourages people that if they're just feeling unwell, you know, you don't want to risk traveling. If you're driving yourself, then you're taking a risk there because you might be taking medication, or you just might not be 100%. So why are you putting that risk in yourself? If you're taking public transport, you're spreading it around, then you're spreading it to the office. If you're feeling unwell, you can work from home. And I think as a lot of this has shown that people can be at least as productive, if not more productive from home. There's no commute. Depending on your child's situation, there's less or more distractions, but I think people are working out that you can kind of work in smaller blocks. So encouraging that work from home if you're just not feeling well is hopefully I see as a big advantage, and that being the hero who comes in is not an attitude or culture that the organisation really wants.
Definitely, and I know some, my views were actually aligned to both of what you said there as well, but I know some countries have different countries have different rules around sick leave, but I guess it is that open and honest conversation of the impact of someone staying at home or working from home because they're sick is less financially than the impact of the whole office being unavailable because everyone's sick because that person chose to come in. So it has been honest, transparent, allowing people to call out that they are unwell and encouraging people to look elsewhere. I think there's a second part to this as well, and that's for companies and businesses that have a high degree of customer traffic coming through the door. You've obviously got a risk associated with you there around what customers are bringing in with them and whether they're sick or whether they're unwell or have been. So again, it's about having clear processes and policies and guidelines in place around what kind of customers you want to have and what you're encouraging your customers to do. Obviously, you don't want to turn everyone away, but you do want to make it clear that maybe if you are sick at the moment, it's best to stay away and try for an e-commerce if that's available transaction, or if it's more of a service-orientated business like what I'm in, then a Zoom call is probably sufficient. So again, it's setting those expectations so you don't put your own staff at risk. I think staff safety has got to be paramount for everything there.
Bill, I do suspect for where you do get a lot of foot traffic from the public, you're going to actually have to assume that people are infected. You're just going to have to take that they are a threat and then build your precautions to your staff around that. So as supermarkets have done, having distancing around the checkout, having screens in front of it, they're just going to have to assume that people are infected. And again, so if you've got people coming into a store, build the precautions as if people are infected. Don't treat them in a dismissive or rude manner, but just assume that they are the threat. And then you're protecting everyone. And that is the safest way to go for them as well as your staff.
Yeah, I agree, Alistair. I think it flips around what our Prime Minister said early on, that everyone has to behave as if they have got the virus, and therefore we'll be responsible. I think you're the same. As you kind of got to have, as much as you've got to trust your employees to do the right thing, you've also got to have that mistrust that the perception that everyone might. So have those policies, those frameworks in place that you can manage it. Contact tracing would seem to be the norm at the moment, particularly stepping down levels if countries are similar to New Zealand, and just being able to track what people you've got at any one time in a premises. Right, thank you. I'm going to jump to some of the pre-prepared questions. There's a couple of others that are coming through here, but I think we have kind of touched on them with data management, data governance. So I will, I see there's a few more others there, which we'll jump to, but I just want to go to some of the pre-prepared ones. And Laura, this one's more aimed for you, but Alistair, feel free to answer it as well if you've got a view. What are some of the things that do catch people out and businesses out when they actually start to exit from a business continuity scenario? So in your experience, what are some of the things that have tripped them up along the way?
So from me, no one's going to be returning to normal because it doesn't exist anymore. So you need to work out your new normal and what's going to work for you, what's changed. It's important to carefully think through about all those changes that you do implement. Particularly as we move through in New Zealand, we have 4 alert levels. So we're considering moving down to alert level 3. So what does that mean specifically for your business and what changes you have to implement there? And it's really easy to create new problems while you're trying to fix an existing one. So, when you're putting in measures to contact trace or social distancing, things like that, it's important to consider the overall ramifications so you don't end up making a huge mess of it and creating some huge ungodly process that nobody can follow.
Thanks, Laura. Alistair, any other thoughts?
Well, usually if you've actually created a disaster response or business continuity plan, you will have created a rollback scenario. And as Laura rightly said, no one's going to be rolling back now. There is no going back to how everything was. So if you did have a rollback section, it's probably out the window straight away. It's, as Anthony specified at the very beginning, it's what bits are you going to be moving and when and how. So, well, how is, I guess, the questions we're dealing with here, but it's going to be much more micro rather than a whole big rollback plan. So you may be moving some bits back, and that's where you then focus on the little bits. So a big rollback plan is out, minor rollback plans for little areas are in. So it's the mini rollback.
And on that train of thought, for smaller companies, for the companies that are a little bit more nimble and quick, they will find this a bit easier to manage. But larger businesses, and probably preface that by saying anything over 50, or maybe any company that runs out of 2 distinct locations or 2 different cities, probably going to find this a lot harder. So what are some of the things that they should consider?
I think that they need to be open and flexible to new ideas. So I actually had a message from someone today who was saying, you know, they're going through a huge restructure and redundancy so that all of their staff can work from these hubs, because there's a perception that they can't work from home, but they're actually working from home now. So there needs to be some, you know, flexibility from top management about being open to these new solutions and that they can actually work.
Yes, hopefully this has given faith to management's somewhat sniffy views on home working. that actually people are productive, and that there's often a lot less distractions and people get a lot more done. I mean, obviously customer interactions have changed, but actual working from home is still a productive way of going forwards.
Definitely, and I think what we're seeing is the barriers to working remotely are not the people, but typically the process or the way work is received by certain people. If you know, there's some jobs that physically can't work remotely because they actually receive work in a structured manner and they have to deliver that. But for many others, the challenge has been that they just can't get the work they need to do, whether it be data input or data management, and therefore it's a company problem as opposed to an individual problem.
Yes, and I guess that's where we're looking at the processes. Running a BIA on the processes to actually make them available to home working is definitely something that may go on. I mean, I see Peter's raised the question of, are we going to review, redo all those plans? The answer is yes, it's start again and lessons learned. Because yeah, we're going to start from a different position to where we were beforehand. As Laura said, that there's a new normal, everything's going to be a lot more flexible, and change is almost guaranteed to happen again and again now.
Definitely. And it's showing that the risk that was always there of pandemic is actually a real risk. It's not just this perceived, well, we've cured all the bugs and we've cured all the viruses, so pandemics aren't a problem anymore. Actually, they're a pandemic because we haven't cured them, because we don't even know about them. So reviewing those impact assessments and plans post COVID-19 is critical to include it for any pandemic that may happen.
Absolutely. And in terms of the good practice guidelines, that's one of the standard things, is that after any disruption that you should be reviewing all of your plans. So I would expect that, you know, the plans should be reviewed. And if they were an all hazards plan to start with, hopefully, you know, there might not be that many changes. But I'm guessing there'll be a lot of innovative solutions that have come out of this that should be brought into the plan, so that in 5 or 10 years, people can review the plans and they can see all the learnings that happened, and you know, so all that information isn't lost.
Definitely. And it's one thing that when I was managing major incidents, one of the things we endeavored after every incident was to run a post-incident review where we didn't look at root cause. That was the realm of problem management, if you're familiar with the 2 segments of service management. What we were doing was looking at breakdowns in the process and identifying, were these scenario-based breakdowns, did the process have to be broken because of what the incident was, or was it because the process itself is broken, and what changes do we need to enact on the process that we then communicate out for next time? Because it could be that the scenario we encountered wasn't one we'd ever planned for, and therefore the process wasn't fit for purpose, but you could change that, or you could adapt that as a scenario. So definitely bring those in. One of the other questions coming through in the Q&A that I want to address comes from Daniel Watson. And Alistair, I'm going to put this one to you to answer. It's around temporary solutions, and what Daniel's asking. Temporary solutions have a bad habit of becoming permanent. What suggestions and ideas have you got on how to ferret out any shadow IT bodges that were done at this time, so that we can at least formalize them or reverse them?
Well, if they involve cloud services, a cloud access security broker, a CASB, is a really good tool. I would recommend it in learning mode, and or sort of transparently, so you then get to see what's going on. If those were the changes made, that's the perfect tool. I mean, it gives you a good view of where your company, or what your company is using, what it's paying for, and where your data is going. But if it's actually changes to your own systems, a lot harder. And that goes back to my suggestion about looking at access logs, seeing who's been where and what they've been doing. Hopefully, if you have some kind of security function, they've been looking anyway, because this BCP period has been an additional risk to your organization's security posture. So someone should have been proactively looking. If they weren't, it's again a chance to get someone to run through those logs, see who's been doing what. Hopefully you can automate it as much as possible, but unfortunately some of it may well be manual. But it's kind of a search tool of some description is going through it.
Yeah, and I think within there as well, there's an element of, or there's a need to have an amnesty on staff of saying, well, we accept that it had to happen, probably because something we have didn't enable you to work from home. So as much as you can automate it, just being transparent and saying, can you tell us what you've used so that we can at least track it is very helpful as well. So it's that blend of automation and manual, and not wrapping people over the knuckles right now for using a tool that wasn't authorized, because the situation may have necessitated it. But it's more if you can capture it and then put a process or a policy or a rule in place, a business rule in place around whether that tool is allowed to be used or not. That's then when you start to become a little bit more focused on the discipline of people breaking the rules.
Yeah, and I guess this comes to one of the discussions that John raises about people not wanting to turn back to the old ways. There's going to almost have to be company-wide discussions about what we've all learned. So it's not just the stakeholders or, senior management who discuss the impacts of this. It's across everyone of how did we all feel this went for us? Did this work for you? Did this work for you? Does this, what issues did you run into? It's going to have to be a whole big company-wide discussion. Obviously, for bigger companies, it's going to be broken up, but for smaller companies, it's going to have to be, let's hopefully get everyone on a Zoom call and discuss what we actually found.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's definitely part of this, as much as we'll talk about reviewing the government responses or the government's responses, depending on different countries and who was right and who was wrong. Companies need to do it as well. What causes the problems? Why did we see an uptick in culture or a downtick in culture while everyone was working remotely? And what can we learn from that? So there's HR elements in there. And I think that feeds into the question that Mark's got as well about what policies do you suggest companies review? I think all of them. In all honesty,
yeah.
Leave no stone unturned. I mean, there's probably some simple ones you don't need to touch, like vehicle usage policy. Probably not such a big deal, but at least have a look at most of the policies and see how they deal with a pandemic, with working remotely, with working in a decentralized fashion, because most policies do address not command and control, but a leader with their team in one place, and we're starting to break away from that. So as many of them as you can, I think. Yes,
and taking the approach that people may be working irregular hours now because they've got children around, or just working from home means they can't work the kind of strict 9 to 5. Is that actually a problem? If they're working some core hours, but all they get things done, it's looking at how things have actually gone and have our assumptions been wrong for all these years. This is a chance to use a major break that everyone accepts is something huge to reshape the culture, and that we should take that as an opportunity, not as a threat.
I agree, and I think that there'll be more, like we said, more acceptance of working from home, but also more part-time arrangements. So in regards to the question about, the toxic office culture, I think having a break from the office and say doing 2 days a week from home can make that toxic culture far less overbearing, because it doesn't become your 5 days a week, normal. You're only in there for a few days, so you can tolerate a bit more. So yeah, I think that also builds in a bit of it's good business continuity practice, because once people are working from home, it makes it much easier for them to to do it on the fly, to do it quickly, because they've got their setup, already ready to go, and they practice it once or twice a week.
Definitely. I think some of the things we're starting to see come out of the woodwork have not been limitations in companies' ability to work from home, but limitations in personal ability, and it could do with their personal tech setup. Not every house is created equal, so some have got great investment in technology, some have got less, and I think for some people that have struggled to work from home previously, that are now knowing what those barriers are, there's an opportunity there to have a good conversation about whether it's right for them and what they need to change as well. And I think that comes back to the point that I made earlier about within your policies. If you're saying we enable people to work from home and we encourage them, well, what do you need to offer them to make it possible? You can't just expect that everyone will work from home because they have an internet connection. If they've got a dodgy router, do you need to help them invest to get the right router, or at least offer them solutions as well? Sticking with the theme as well, and I'm not sure we've got a clear answer for this one, but we'll at least put it in for discussion, from Joanne Dyer around schools coming back, and particularly in that blended model where schools are expected to go both online and in person on site at the same time. Laura, Alistair, any thoughts on how schools can be managing that return to normal from a technology perspective, particularly if a teacher has to stand in front of a camera in a class?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussion around this, and I know that the teachers are particularly unhappy about it. I think that there's different levels of the online learning that, some teachers are really taking it to the extreme, and they're teaching, like as if it's just a normal day, just teaching all day. And then if they're also expected to do it in front of the class, that's going to be difficult. I think the most important thing is to try and do it at the same time. So like have a camera at the front of the class so that those people that are at home can just watch what the teacher's actually teaching, rather than trying to do two separate things. And then there's obviously the health and safety considerations as well, the social distancing and keeping a good record of who's on site.
I'm going to imagine it's going to push teaching to embrace technology more. So it's a lot easier to teach online in the sense that you can share stuff straight away. So any resources or things that a teacher wants to demonstrate, they can be shown much more easily if it's all online. Trying to sync that together with then sort of drawing on a whiteboard or doing something different for on-site children is going to be tricky. I think they almost need to take one approach, which is going to be the children in the class kind of see a projected picture of what the online children would be doing. So it's all one experience. So from a technology approach, it's pushing towards more teaching through technology. So having that on a computer, basically using all the online resources, and then kind of that's the way it will go. And then obviously, even if all the children do come back, that's an approach that can be embraced, because it's just a lot easier to convey information like that. You can record it, as you can record these meetings. So children who aren't there, as a sick child, can then get all his lessons recorded. It just seems like a chance to, again, break the old normal and go with a new pattern. And as for sort of making decisions about sending children to school, I guess that's the parents' decision, whether they feel it's safe. I think no one can make the decision for children but their parents on this kind of matter. I wouldn't see anyone else can make a strong recommendation that the parents shouldn't be able to circumvent.
Yeah, a really good point. I think that it comes back to the parents, absolutely. And within there, both of you talked a little bit about the technology and how to deal with it. And I think that's something that's got to be taken into consideration. Horses for courses, Zoom is great, but the Zoom webinar has its limitations. If you're trying to teach a class remotely, how you get that real-time feedback coming in. Obviously here we've locked down other than the Q&A. Do you want to do that in a classroom environment versus just an open video call where you might have 15 students? And for kids who aren't familiar with video conferencing etiquette, which adults aren't always either, it may be quite hard to keep them on topic, on focus, or at least even just in a cohesive conversation so that you've only got one person talking at once. So there's some other rules that you'll need to think about going back into there, but I think it does definitely come down to the parents and what they're comfortable with. Sticking with the questions and the theme as well, and this one comes from Kim Mayo around recommended approach for the possibility of flexible work schedules in a heavily, I'm going to say regulated more than unionised environment, Kim, because I think regulation plays into this as much as unions. But open this up for Laura and Alistair to address as well. I think there's a conversation. For me, it's about communication again. It's communication with the staff, with the union, and with the regulator to actually talk about the outcome you're trying to get and how you're going to put that in place.
Yeah, I think it's assuming that the world has changed, and when there were rules made up, maybe even actually laws, or when agreements with the union were created, the world was a different place then, and everything's got to be reviewed. And I imagine certainly from a union point of view, keeping their members happy and employment will be their main concern. Therefore, making things more flexible is usually what a union wants. I mean, sometimes not, but most of the time it's making sure their employees are employed and happy, which is usually flexibility is good for that.
I think one of the biggest barriers would be with the shift work and people, you have to work around your colleagues. So obviously, not everybody can have a flexible schedule because somebody's got to be there at certain times of the day. So it's about, everybody's kind of has to work in together to make sure that all those timings work.
Definitely, and I think even in certain areas where there's shift patterns, the remote working and the businesses accepting remote working actually works out better for the employees. An example I've got was when I used to work for a local bank here in New Zealand, and we were looking at split shifts for our call centre operators. Now that's a unionised workforce. It was actually beneficial to offer split shifts and to try and get remote working for them as well, because of all the constraints that bringing people into the office to sit there unproductive for half their shift brought about with it. So one of the things we were addressing is not just the technology capability to deliver it, but also the communication that needed to happen with those staff, with the workforce, with the union, with everyone in there. So I think it's just about being clear that there is no, where we were at the start of the year is not where we are today, and everyone's going to have to adjust to it. I'm just going to, there's another question from Kim as well, which I want to stick with. Tips to establishing prioritisation criteria for re-entry of process. So, Laura, I'll put this one to you because it probably ties into that business impact analysis piece again.
Yeah, so I think in terms of prioritising, it's really important that you sit down with a wide range of people. So you want kind of the heads of all the different departments there, because what you need to look at is all the different implications. So you might have service level agreements and things like that, or key performance indicators that one department head is completely unaware of, and the other department head can say, hey, actually my process or activity needs to have priority because of X, Y, and Z. So I think the most important thing here is collaboration and discussion. So what I would usually recommend is doing it in a workshop style. So one person could write down all the different processes and say, hey, this is what I think. And then everybody else can pretty much tear it to shreds and, drag and drop, move them all around until everybody agrees that, yep, this is the priority.
Great.
Yeah, it's going to be the processes that were making the money and making the most sense during this period. With the changes, in levels, are they the ones that are still the key ones to the business? So it's going to have to be that collaborative discussion across the business to which ones are the ones that we need to concentrate on.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't think I can add anything more to what you both said there. Two more comments that from John Barley here rather than questions that I'll address, and then there is a question from John as well which we'll raise. But one point John's made, and I know from having worked with John that he's got a strong focus in policy creation. He's made a very clear point here, that a very good point, that policy creation isn't just top down. It's not just the directorship or the board or the owners deciding what's going to be in the policy, but it's collaborative. It's got to work for everyone. So you've got to have everyone on board to build that. But also he raises the point that it's not just reviewing policies and processes after this, but also the apps you're using, particularly around a health and safety environment or for mapping health and safety. If your apps are location specific, and you're starting to break away to remote working, you need to address those apps as well. So thank you, John, for putting that, adding that input as well.
Well, there's also another aspect to that where it's been actually over the last few years, companies that have had remote workers have had apps to track them to make sure that they're okay and have panic buttons on them. So the forestry and other sort of service industries that send people out and about. Now, they may be an apps that actually need to be brought over into now the sort of remote working world, where you can, you can actually say, are my staff okay when they're at home? Because in the office, you can see if they fall over, but now you can go, there's a panic button, there's other tools that are useful for people who are working off in the wilderness that now apply to people working from home. So that health and safety aspect probably does change, because you still bear some responsibility for your remote workers, even though it's not quite the same as them being in the office.
Definitely.
I think emergency notification systems come into play there as well. So a lot of people do their emergency notification just via WhatsApp or email, and having a proper system in place allows you to send out, those mass text messages that just say, are you okay? And people can reply yes or no, and it gives you an easy spreadsheet to track at the end of it. So it's definitely a case for those, and I think that they will increase in popularity with such a dispersed workforce.
Definitely, and I think within there, there's probably more appetite for use of some of those than any others that may be perceived Big Brother. Dial in and tell me what you're doing every day, or having a Zoom stand up so we can check in what's in. Is if we trust that you can do your job remotely and unsupervised, then we don't need to necessarily check in on you. But if we do send an alert in that fashion, we want you to let us know. We want you to respond to it. We need you to. Now, the question from John that I just want to touch on is around paperless office. The point is made that in a number of scenarios, we've seen people remove everything from their office, take it home, and how they're going to get that back to business as usual, and whether they're carrying too much risk with paper and with physical documentation as well, and physical collateral. I think within here there's a review point of if you've brought everything home, now's a good time. You've got a little bit of time on your hands. Now's a good time to actually sit down. If you're a small business, or if you're a large business, you can assign people to it, to actually figure out what's important and what you need to keep hold of, what you can digitize and discard versus what you can completely discard. I think some things have a lifespan to them that they need to be held on for, but a digital copy is just as good as the original. Yes,
this is definitely an opportunity to get rid of all those mounds of paper that people just like to hang on to because they put effort into creating them, and there's belief that there is value into them, but most of the time it's just sitting there being a fire hazard.
Definitely. And it's an opportunity to look at some alternative technologies as well. Digital signatures and digital signing has been mainstream for a few years now, and it's actually covered under most legislation around the world. As far as I'm aware, I know New Zealand definitely allows for a digital signature. So it's an opportunity to actually look at a piece of paper and say, did we just print this because we needed a signature? And if so, what can we do to digitize that? And that then comes back to the future focus of your technology plan. What are the systems we're going to need to bring in to actually help us be remote or to help us be paperless or working on less paper? One from Daniel Marriott, addressing the difference between flexible working and uncoordinated working. And I think within here as well, there's a point he's going to make, and I'll cover the question in a moment for everyone, around work doesn't have to be 9 to 5 anymore, particularly if you're remote. And the question he's got is, how will ways of working need to adjust to allow for split on-site, off-site, and possibly changed hours? So possibly employees where you're bringing them in saying, actually, you know what, you can work from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. or your shift hours are changing. And how will the ways of working? From my perspective, I think what will happen in there is that at the leadership team level, at least, they need to understand the change and what they want their workforce to look like and what's important to them as well as an organisation. But then they just need to bring that back into communicating with the staff. And one of the comments from John earlier was about collaborating on building policies. I think there's an opportunity here to collaborate with staff. Is what works for you? Does having a later start work for you, and does it work for the business? And can we enact that and make it possible for you, while not jeopardizing anything else the business is doing.
Yeah, and this does mean communication among staff, so using calendars or some other system so other people know when you're about, whether it's having, you know, just an active on something like WhatsApp or Teams or an equivalent, because it's fair to say that if you're working slightly peculiar hours, you've got to let other people know, because if you're working like 10 to 6 and they call you at 7 in the morning, you probably don't want to be called then. So it's making sure that everyone in the organisation can know when you're planning to do stuff and you're available. That's going to be important if things do get much more flexible like that. So as Anthony said, it's a company-wide strategy to it that allows people to share amongst themselves the way that they're working.
Yeah, and I think it's also a bit of a mindset shift. So unless you're physically working directly with customers or on some kind of manufacturing line, a lot of the work can be output based. So people are really tied to, you know, I own you for these 8 hours a day. Whereas there could be a mindset shift where it's more, these are your KPIs and this is the work you need to achieve. And it's actually up to you, you know, how long you spend on it. Well, as long as it's achieved to the right standard and the right quality and the work is completed, then it shouldn't really matter how long it takes.
Definitely. We're close to the end of the session, so there's 2 more questions in here that I want to quickly address, and then I've got one to put to Alistair and Laura as well. The first one, another one from John: who does backup and how's it done? For any organisation, if you're working with a technology partner or if you've got a technology team, part of the services they offer should be backup. If they're not offering your backup solution, you might want to have a very good conversation with them about why not. If you don't work with a partner, if you're like me, solo operator, and everything's stored in the cloud, one thing you need to be aware of is that cloud is not the same as backup. So cloud storage and backup aren't the same capability. What I'm meaning there is that if I was to delete all the files in my OneDrive and then decide 6 months down the track I wanted them back, Microsoft won't have kept them. There's just no remit on me on that under my license with Microsoft. So it's on me to be backing those up in a way that suits. So either with an external USB drive or finding a cloud-based backup solution, which exists as well, which is kind of funny to say cloud's not backup, but you can use cloud to back up cloud. But it's just making sure that you've got solutions in place there. And like I say, talk to your IT provider, have a chat with an IT company if you need a bit more guidance as well. The other one that I just want to address is finally from Kim, talking not just the files that have been moved and shipped away, but some companies have actually had to send home desktop computers for their staff to work remotely. And whether we've had experience in having equipment shipped back to the office and how messy it was, I'm going to address this one first, because when I worked at Bank of New Zealand, we had several situations where we shipped hardware home. Often it was laptops for people who didn't usually have them. And those were driven by earthquakes, both in Christchurch and in Kaikoura, which caused our premises, both corporate and branch network, to be unavailable. So we were sending people to work from home, and we were giving people laptops who didn't normally have them. So normally they'd have had a desktop in the office and they were given a laptop. It starts at the beginning. You've got to keep track of it at the beginning, is who's been given what, and what other peripherals they've been given as well. You know, have you supplied them with a monitor? Just what equipment they've taken home with them, so that you can track it when it comes back as well. If you haven't done that, it's going to get very messy. For most big companies, I think there's always a little bit of leakage of losing track of equipment. So it's very hard to do, but particularly now, if you're sending it home, if you haven't written down who's got what, even if it's just on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet, it's going to be very messy later on as well. And it comes back to transparency and honesty. Alistair, I guess, have you got any thoughts on that as well?
Definitely. One thing is, if you are bringing back stuff that's been worked on at home, is you must assume that it's going to be infected when it comes back to the network. Don't have them plug it straight back into the corporate network. There's a chance that they were doing personal stuff on it at the same time, or just mistakes may have been made by themselves and they clicked on stuff. So you kind of want a quarantine network for people who are bringing machines back from home, that you can plug them in, and then some kind of AV anti-malware tool can then just do a quick check and make sure that they are not infected. Otherwise, you run the risk of suddenly coming back from this and getting your whole network ransomware, something equivalent, a Trojan sitting on your network. So yes, when they all come back, if they are being brought back, assume that they are infected. Again, it's assume the worst case and work from there.
Yeah. And a great point from John on this one. Thank you for adding this one in, John, as well. If you're shipping them with logistics companies, couriers, or freight movers, understand what your insurance obligations are as well while they're in transit. Hopefully, most people will be bringing them back physically, but if you do need to do that, then keep track of your insurance. Just before we wrap up, and I want to thank everyone for taking part today and participating with some great questions in there. I've certainly picked up a lot from both Laura and Alistair's perspective, so hopefully it's been valuable for you all. But just before we wrap up, I want to ask the question of both Alistair and Laura, and this is a tough one because we're not futurists, we're not here to predict, but what's one thing you think is going to be different post COVID-19? What's the biggest change you think we'll see in the world of business?
So I think that there will be much wider acceptance of working from home on a part-time basis. So you'll have, for me, I think it's the best of both worlds. You get the interaction of your colleagues in the office 2 or 3 days a week, and then you get the flexibility of working at home for the rest of the week. So I think that's going to become way more common. Social distancing, at least for a short period of time, will become the norm. So you may have, people sitting at every second desk, or putting perspex screens up between their desks. And also more frequent use of tools like this for online communication, and subsequently less travel because of using video conferencing instead.
Definitely. Alistair, how about yourself?
I think it's going to be heading towards a more flexible attitude to how people work. It's just nothing's going to be written in stone. You write anything in stone, it's just going to fail when something happens that you don't see coming. So it's the flexible attitude to how people work, the flexible attitude to how you secure them. So there's going to, usually when you do a risk assessment, you have a number of scenarios. I think it's time to start assuming that there could be some outliers there that will have a huge impact. So have some flexibility within your plans to cope for those unexpected things. And it's just, don't assume that you've covered all aspects and that things can't change. Just assume that change is inevitable.
Definitely. And I think what the biggest change we'll see is actually a shift in value people that work for them. Great of organisational value back to the staff, as opposed to asking staff to adhere to the organisation. If you're encouraging working from home, you're encouraging everything that comes with that as well. You're encouraging more family time. You're encouraging people taking a little bit of time out when distractions are too much. That in the office they may have focused on trying to be too busy. So you're encouraging a different way of working for everyone. And I think that's the big one. Is there's been a lot of talk over the last few years of new ways of working, different ways of working. If you're in the tech industry, agile, waterfall, DevOps, all different concepts that are out there. What we're actually going to see is a lot more acceptance that some people are actually just going to work in a way that works for them. So just finally, thank you all again for coming. Just one final screen share here. Thank you all for your time today. Just running through again, I'm Anthony McMahon from the IT Psychiatrist. We've had Laura Topless from BCP Builder and Alistair Miller from nsp.co.nz. We've got the websites there if you want to go and find out more about the respective companies, or our LinkedIn profiles if you want to connect with us